All right, Daily Boy back here again with another one for you guys. If you guys remember, uh, I started. That's when I was in Guyana with that video with the big eagle above me in the background, where I was starting to talk about Islam, and I talked about an introduction to Islam. I believe I talked about a couple of things in that video. I think I talked about the sort of cognitive dissonance between the texts because I was saying, hey man, some of the earlier texts that are purported to be from Allah was then changed, and so we couldn't really know what they really said, and it's like just a convenient feature where, later off we don't have the holistic word of God to compare it to, whereas within the Christian paradigm we have the story from the beginning to the end, which was a huge problem for us. And we discussed some of the issues of the differences between Islam and Christianity. Now somebody is gonna say, man, Dale, why you even talking about Islam? Well, that day I was supposed to have somebody on the channel who is a Muslim to discuss Islam with. I mean, it's just like, aside from, the educational purposes and the value of having these conversations, it's also just fun. Like, it's really like cool to have these interfaith discussions and all this type of stuff. But aside from that, just from a Christian perspective, there is, an apologetic nature to this. There is a nature to having these discussions in which you can then use this knowledge and whatnot to help further the kingdom of God in a positive way. You know what I'm saying? And you ought to know about the culture and the various other ideologies around you to adequately be able to have conversations with people either who are Muslims, who maybe are thinking about becoming Muslims, and all this other stuff, right? And so it's just good to be informed. You know what I'm saying? In general, they say knowledge is power. And so, it's good to be able to think about, and just in general, it's good to have, an understanding of other faith groups around you, right? Even if you grew up Christian or you grew up Muslim, or if you grew up Hindu or whatever, it's good to understand all the various ideas that are out there in order to make a better and more informed decision. Now, you probably don't want to come to Daily Boy if you're a Muslim to learn about Islam. You probably want to go to your, imams and those type of things. And sometimes you might want to go to somebody who has an opposing position. So you might want to go to the critics of Islam in order to understand what the critics are saying and them type of things. So it's not totally unfruitful to listen to somebody. Similarly, if you're a Christian, you don't want to go to, critics only. You want to make sure you're going to people who are reputable, who are defenders of Christianity, who understands the topics and the nuances and are able to adequately get into them and help you to sort of see what you're seeing in the Bible from a Christian perspective, or within the whole conversation of worldviews from a Christian perspective. But you also want to look at what the critics are saying about your faith. You know what I'm saying? So, there's many different aspects to this. Maybe you might even side with them. Maybe you might even look at some of this evidence and say, hey man, Christianity is not the truth. You know what I'm saying? And maybe that's the conclusion that you reach. Or you might be able to, at least in some sense, you might be able to look at Christianity as a whole and understand the objections to Christianity and understand how to adequately refute those objections. And, for me, just give you guys a quick background. You guys know this from my testimony. My testimony is on the channel. I did come to faith through Muslims, essentially. Muslims kind of kept asking me questions about my religion. I grew up as a Christian in the church, was living wild at that time. And so, my friend circles around me, they had pressing questions. Hey man, what about the Bible? What about this? What about that? And so, and this is something I want to say, because people will often be like, oh, yo, you shouldn't talk about Islam, you shouldn't talk about other people's faith and those type of things. When you read the Quran, it talks about our faith a lot. It talks about Christians a lot, talks about Christian ideologies a lot. It kind of works as a refutation to Christian ideology in a lot. I read the first 16 chapters of the Quran. They're called surahs, and pretty much everywhere you can find these sort of apologetics against Christianity throughout the entire book. You know what I mean? And so it's in there. They talk about Christians directly. They talk to Christians directly. And I find that Muslims don't really have a problem in general with critiquing other people's faith. And so they would often, and when I was asked these questions originally, I didn't take it no way. I didn't take it as a personal attack. I didn't feel I felt like my homies were saying, hey man, Dale, yeah, you're a Christian, but I keep believing this book, and this book has been changed so many times, and it has so many different versions, and you don't really know what the original said. And look at all the problems with the manuscripts, and look at all the problems with these apparent contradictions. Don't you think this is a contradiction? Or look at the violence that's taught in here, or look at it, what I mean? And in all fairness, those are fair questions, and I don't know, I didn't take it offensively necessarily. There were and there were things that you should look into. So there's no issue with having people sort of challenge your faith or whatever. And I thought it was very easy, and there were some mockery and some rhetoric in there that was could be seen as offensive or whatever, but it was all cool. I was cool with it. I was good. I'm a student of knowledge. I want to know stuff. I want to deep dive. I want to check it out. I want to find the answers. I want to work through things with people, and I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to know the truth, right? And so, that's what I did. Now, I worked my way through potential objections to Christianity from an Islamic perspective to the point where the question shifted from questions about my faith now to affirmations about the Islamic faith. So the affirmations were things like, hey man, the Quran is perfectly preserved, and this is evidence that the Quran is the true word of God, and Islam is this and that. Oh, Muhammad is the perfect moral standard for all of mankind for all of the times, you know what I'm saying? And various other claims, you know what I mean? The Quran has these scientific miracles inside of it, and is predicting future science adequately, and they kept making claims. So now, instead of just trying to look at issues within from a polemic standpoint against Christianity, I was now looking at claims from Islam. And so I kept going through, and I kept finding these things where I'm oh, this is an issue. Nah, you're saying this man's a perfect moral character for all of mankind, and then there's these moral issues with his character or whatever, right? Man, man, that switched so fast. And I'm gonna tell you something, there's lots of people that are yo, Dale, I don't even my own people are just yo, Dale, I don't like you talking about Islam. I don't want you you know what I'm saying? And Muslims, if you guys watching this, if you guys do come across this, if you guys know people that are Muslims, you probably know this about it. You guys need to chill with that, bro. You guys need to calm down a little bit, bro, because you cannot just be seen as is aggressive, aggro, you're gonna get violent if people talk about, and have interfaith dialogues with you guys. Anything that can be said would use against you in the court of vigilante, you know what I'm saying? People will attack you for just talking about, the prophet in a way. I saw this video with my dog David Lynn on the streets. Now, David Lynn was having a debate with a Muslim across from him, and at some point he kept saying Muhammad. And of course, as Christians, we don't put the respect on the name, because from our paradigm, we cannot rate him as a prophet, because we don't believe that yet, right? At least, like, we don't believe it. You know what I'm saying? So if you do come to that state during a discussion or something, or like later off in your life, and you accept him as a prophet and you accept Islam, yeah, of course you would then go ahead and like acquiesce to the request of like putting in the peace be upon you and all of this. And I guess my Dukes was not using the peace be upon him like rhetoric, and so they were just like, yo, dog, you have to say this after. And they're now imposing this on a Christian who's debating them on whether Islam is true or not. Talk about assuming, what do we call it? We call it begging the question, right? This is where you assume that your point that you're trying to make is already correct. You know what I'm saying? You talk about assuming, and so he almost got beat up. Like, people started getting really aggressive and violent with him just because he's like, listen, I don't believe that. I don't have to use that terminology or whatever. But calm down, guys. Chill out a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Don't get, and for you Muslims that are peaceful, that are like, all right, yo, like, I don't rock with that. Yeah, you guys had to be the first ones to kind of like hit up your Dukes that are like extra, aggro. Because I won't lie, I personally have gotten death threats before. I've personally gotten people like getting very angry and very like, you know what I'm saying, almost violent and things like that. And I've personally have like a lot of people who are telling me, hey man, yo, be careful, like, you're not allowed to talk about this, you know what I'm saying? So my point was, when I was doing my apologetics thing, when I was just like researching the claims against Christianity, everything was cool. And then when all of a sudden I'm engaging in a polemic where I'm saying, hey man, look at this story, like, this doesn't line up with what you guys said. Hey, look at this Quran variant here, and from these various different books and whatnot that are Arabic Qurans and whatnot that say various different things. And like, we started getting into those conversations, all of a sudden people were very sensitive, and it was very weird to see someone who has this sort of like, this casual demeanor about attacking your faith and questioning your faith and saying that your God is not God and this and that, attacking your book and whatnot. And then you're defending this casually, and then when you make the same claim, or you put the same test, or you put the same scrutiny behind it, all of a sudden it's like, don't talk about my prophet, don't talk about my book, blah blah blah. Yeah, he does say, like, anyways. But I'm ranting, bro. What is this? 13 minutes of me just ranting already. I haven't even got to the topic. Anyways, I did do the introduction video. Now, I did ask for this individual to come on several times. I guess they don't want to come on, and I will get a Muslim of some sort of caliber one day to come on, and all the various other people from different faith groups, even people from within our faith group. And I want to reiterate this point too. It's not just Islam that we talk about. If you look at this channel, we haven't talked about Islam very much. And we've talked about Christians, we've talked about, and we've critiqued everybody. It's fair critique for everybody, you know what I'm saying? So lock in and let's get going with this new video. So what are we going to be talking about today? 15 minutes into the video, just apologizing for even bringing up the topic. Look at this, crazy. Anyways, we are going to be talking about the origin of Islam, like how it started. And we're going to look at this from a critical perspective and think about it. And just, read with me, rock with me, and we'll see if we can get through this. I believe this is the Hadith here. Now, there's slight variations to this Hadith throughout, for some of you guys who don't know what a Hadith is. So how the Quran works is not like the Bible. The Bible has this, or like story of the beginning of mankind and like their forefathers and all their stories, like, coming down the line all the way. It's the messianic line, and then you get to Jesus, and then you go all the way down to the end time. It's very like sort of like a chronological account, and it's stories and stories after stories after stories type of thing, right? In the Quran, how it works is the revelations are given throughout Muhammad's life, and throughout his life, these revelations are given due to different circumstances. Then those verses are compiled into the Quran in order for memorization, so they're not chronologically ordered according to how they were revealed to him, nor can anybody even really know like exactly when what was revealed. There's like periods where they can go back to and say, hey, this was from the Meccan period, this is from the Medinian period, this, that, right? And so it's organized in length of surahs. So you got the longest one first, and then, coming all the way down to the end, about 114 chapters totally, or surahs they call them. It gets shorter and shorter then to the last one, which is the shortest. Now, the first one kind of doesn't count. It's just like a statement. And then you get from the second one, which is Bakra, which means the cow, is the first set of verses that are in the Quran. Now, it is one book, not several books. It is just, these 114 chapters or surahs, they call them. And you've got, this super long one. I think it's 280 something verses right in the beginning. But all of these verses, then in order to understand them and the context of these verses, you cannot just read the surrounding context of the verses in that section. You have to read the hadiths. Generally, the hadiths is the place where you go that's sort of like they combine together. So you'd have to read the Quran and the hadiths sort of together to get a fuller understanding of what's happening in this hadith. And the hadiths are like stories of like, how these verses came about and whatnot, right? We have what we call the cave Hira encounter. This is where Muhammad, I could say the prophet, like, the prophet of Islam, essentially, Muhammad, is encountering. I don't even like saying that necessarily, because then it sounds like I'm affirming that he's a prophet. But obviously, you guys know I'm not saying that he is a prophet. I'm saying the prophet of Islam according to, what they think about him, right? This is the story of that first encounter, where he encounters the sort of angel Gabriel. Now, understand that unlike the Bible, the way that the Quran is given is they believe, at least Sunni Muslims, they believe that there's this Quran that's in heaven, and then that Quran is then revealed verbatim to this angel, and then this angel reveals it directly verbatim to Muhammad, and then Muhammad is then kind of, giving this to his companions. And, some people would say that he's writing it down. Some people would say he couldn't write or something like that. And some people would say that his companions and various people that he was teaching or reciting these verses to, they were memorizing it, and then they were also reciting it. We're going to look into that 1.2. We're going to look into the first compilation of the Quran, and then the second compilation of the Quran as well. Maybe sometime in the future. We're not going to talk about Islam very frequently on this channel, but we will revisit it or whatever sporadically, and we'll compile these into sort of a section of videos on Islam. We've got sections. We got Who is Jesus, which is I don't know how much parts, a 8-10 part series on that. And so we're going to compile that into a section later and whatnot, right? And so here, let's get right into this hadith, you know what I mean, of the first encounter, and just like kind of look at it from a critical perspective and think about it, right? And so it says, the commencement of divine inspiration to Allah's messenger. Maybe that's a heading or something like that. It says, was in the form of good, righteous, true dreams in his sleep, right? He never had a dream, but that it came true like bright daylight. In case anyone wants to know where they could find this so they could kind of read along, let me just go down to the bottom of it. It's Sahih al-Bukhari, 6982. Sahih al-Bukhari, 6982. And, it's book 91, hadith 1. Now, I just want to be a little bit clear here. Sometimes the numbering systems are not the same online, and you might not find the exact hadith, and sometimes it takes a little bit of hunting around. Even with some of the references that I'm going to give later, I have looked for those references in the books that they're references on the page, and the page number doesn't align up with the page number that's given in the reference, because depending on how they put it online and how they run the page numbering and things like that, you'll find the source, you'll find the information if you put type in the information, but you might not be this exact numbering system that's used in those type of things. So you'll actually find the hadith, you might not find the exact numbering, the numbering system might be different. Anyways, let's go back here. Let me just pull up and we're gonna read it. Quick time. It's a long one. Okay, so it says, he never had a dream, but that it came true like bright daylight. He used to go in seclusion in the cave of Hira, right? Now, in these hadiths, they actually add some words in, and they put like brackets, so that way you can kind of like, it sounds a little better in English, and some of it is helpful, but also sometimes you got to be careful to know that these are not in the Arabic original phrasing, because sometimes they can be a little bit misleading as well, right? So here it's telling you that, he's sort of like in this dream state, essentially. And so some of the hadiths have it this way. It seems like he's sort of in a sleep and wake. He's not sure if he's having this experience for real. You guys ever experienced that, where in the morning time or whatever, you're kind of half awake, but you're half dreaming or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And so, anyways, it says that he used to go into seclusion in a cave, Hira, where he used to worship, and here in brackets it says Allah alone. So he used to worship continuously for many nights. It says days in brackets here as well, but he used to worship continuously for many nights. And then come back to Khadijah to take his food likewise again for another period to stay, till suddenly the truth descended upon him while he was in the cave of Hira. The angel came to him in it and asked him to read. Now, I want to take a little pause there and say that there are some people who argue that the word angel is never found in any of these. The word angel should be something like Malik or Maliki or something. I don't remember exactly, but in the Arabic. And so I've seen it argued, and sometimes I do that where I go and click the actual Arabics in line, and I try to look for the word, and sometimes I try to extract it and put it on like a lexicon or on Google or something and try to pull it up to see if this is true or not. And I have found it that a lot of times when they say angel, the word angel is missing. So I've heard it argued. I was actually looking for the video where I think it was Rob Christian that did the video on this, where he was talking about the fact that angel is never mentioned. Rob Christian is an Arabic speaker, so he goes through it in depth and whatnot. Now, I didn't find the video to pull it up necessarily. It's an old video. I watched it a really long time ago, and I did do the research aside from that, but this is neither here nor there. So what I want to caution you is, it's very possible that where it says angels here, where it says the angel came to him in it and he asked him to read, that the word angel is not actually there, and it's another word, and in the English translation they're interpreting it as angel, although it doesn't say the angel yet, right? So Muhammad is going on these seclusions. He's in a cave, you know what I'm saying? This entity comes to him, as far as we know, and tells him to read. Now pay attention to what happens. The prophet replied, "I do not know how to read." You know what I'm saying? So already he's saying, listen, bro, I don't know how to read, right? So the prophet added, the angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore, right? He then released me again and asked me to read. And I replied, "I do not know how to read." Whereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it anymore. Let me see. Where am I at? Till I could not bear it anymore. He released me and asked me again to read. But again I replied, "I do not know how to read," or "What shall I read?" You know what I mean? So that's interesting too, right? So this angel catches this man, presses him, right? It says forcefully, and it says like pressed him so hard, right? Till he couldn't bear it anymore is what it's saying. And then it says that he releases him, and then after he's telling him, "Listen, bro, I can't read," and he's pressing him again, a second and a third time, and he's asking him about, and then here it says, "What shall I read?" It kind of seems weird that he doesn't even give him anything to read yet, and he's pressing him and asking him to read. Now, maybe they're just summarizing here, and maybe he did present something for him to read and said read, and he's saying, "Hey, I can't read," and then he's pressing him again. But so far in the story, as far as what's revealed to us here, is he doesn't even give him anything to read. He's just telling the man read. The man's saying, "Bruh, I can't read," and he continues to squeeze him, and it seems like it's causing him distress. This gets weighed out a little bit farther down as we keep going. So here, let me start back from here. He caught me a third time and pressed me, and then released me and said, "Read, in the name of your Lord, who has created all that exists," in quotes. He has created man from a cloth. "Read, your Lord is most gracious up to that which he knew not," right? It has Surah 9, verse 15 in ayah, they call it 15, in brackets here. And then it says, then Allah's messenger returned with the inspiration, his neck muscles twitching with terror, till he entered upon Khadijah and said, "Cover me, cover me." They covered him till his fear was over, and then he said, "O Khadijah, what is wrong with me?" So he runs back to his wife from this cave. And here it says it doesn't say his neck muscles is twitching. Cover me, cover me. I read so many variations of this hadith that I don't know. I need to make sure that that's what this one is saying. It says, yeah, his neck muscles was twitching. In other hadiths, it talks about his heart, like, beating like really, hard. And some places it talks about his, like, veins and stuff like that. So he really, what they're trying to communicate here is that he's terrified. He's been like caught by this thing in a dark cave, pressing him, telling him to read something. You know what I mean? In the story, he's saying he can't read. You know what I mean? Some people say, in another hadith, it talks about it saying recite to him instead of reading, never given him anything to recite, same way. And either way, he's saying I can't read. And it's kind of weird. In the other hadith, he's saying I can't read when the thing is saying for him to recite, which doesn't make any sense, right? Like, why? If he gave him something to recite, then he would just recite it. Like, I can't read is not an appropriate response to recite, if that's the case. I believe that one is in Sahih Muslim. They have the same this story reiterated in a different form. But either way, right? He runs to his wife, Khadija, and he's terrified, is what this is conveying. Whether his neck muscles are twitching, whether his heart's beating fast, I imagine it's a combination of both. And he says to her, cover me, right? So he's shook. He's shook. You know what I'm saying? He's like, yo, cover me, dog. Like, he's in fear right now, right? So he's asking Khadija, what is wrong with me? And then it says, then he told her everything that had happened and said, I fear that something may happen to me. So obviously he's in fear for his life here. And he's saying something's happening to me, Khadija said, never, but have the glad tidings. For by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you as you keep good reactions with your kith and kin. Speak the truth, help the poor and the destitute. Serve your guests generously and assist the deserving. Calamity affected ones, you know what I'm saying? So she's saying the deserving calamity affected ones. Sometimes the way these things are written is a little bit strange because they are translating, from Arabic into English, and you can understand that there is a little bit of a gap in how you can translate what. So you got to kind of understand it a little bit, right? Khadija then accompanied him to her cousin Warqa bin Nafal bin Asad bin Abdul Uzza bin Quasi. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these names. You gotta excuse your boy. So she takes him to her cousin, essentially, right? His name is Warqa. And so she so just to get the story a little bit more full here, right? He goes to the cave. He has this encounter. So far, he's convinced that this is something malevolent that he's experiencing, some kind of demonic force. He's scared for sure for his life. He's been pressed and whatnot a couple of times. The circumstances around it don't make sense as to what the entity was trying to get him to do. Then he's running back to his wife saying, cover me. She's covering him, trying to calm him down. And, of course, like any good wife, she's trying to basically, calm down her husband in this instance. There is something that I want to say that's like outside of this outside of what's going on, but it might provide a little bit of context. Khadija is a begoman. You know what I mean? Khadija is Muhammad's first wife that we know of, at least. And he she's about 40 years old when she marries him. He's about 25 years old. So she's a little bit older than he is, quite a bit, actually. And he's her third husband. She had a few kids prior to this. She's also very wealthy. You know what I'm saying? She's one of the richest families, if not the richest family in Mecca at the time. And so about this time is where Muhammad gains like a bit of freedom. He grew up in like sort of like a more impoverished sort of situation, and now he's like married to this big woman, and she's able to like free him up financially and whatnot. And so this is who he's running to sort of cover him or to protect him, and this is her attempt to sort of calm him down and whatnot. She's telling him, nah fam, don't worry dog, like not you, G, you're a good youth. You know what I'm saying? You do good for people, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, there's never no way say that, like, yo, Allah is going to disgrace you. You know what I'm saying? So, don't even press it. You know what I'm saying? And so, she's trying to calm him down, right? And let's see. She takes him to Waraka, which is her cousin, right? And let's read this a little bit more. It says, Waraka was the son of her paternal uncle, i.e., her father's brother, right? Who during the pre-Islamic period became a Christian and used to write the Arabic writing and used to write the Gospels in Arabic as much as Allah wished him to write. Now notice that Waraka was writing the Gospels. He was basically translating, so other sources were talking about the fact that he's translating the Gospels from Syriac to Arabic, which makes sense. So about the 7th century, this area, they would have been familiar with Christianity. They would have been familiar with the Gospel stories. They would have been familiar with the Talmud and, all of these writings. Actually, they would have been familiar with the Apocryphas, which are the writings that like are sort of side stories, not directly connected to the biblical stories, but they would have been familiar with all of those. The Torah, or the Tanakh rather, both of them, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Tanakh. The Tanakh would be the complete Old Testament, essentially, right? And so here he's writing the Gospels back. That's interesting. It at least affirms that they had the Gospels in those times, and various other verses in the Quran affirms this, right? It talks about Christians should stand upon what was given to them. You know what I mean? It talks about, several different iterations of something the same, like, you know what I mean, that like talks about what was between their hand, the Gospels, and the Torah and the Injil that was in their hands at the time. And so it does affirm that the scriptures were there at least in Muhammad's time, all right? And it wouldn't tell you to affirm something or stand on something that was corrupted. At least, that's not what we would say, what we think. So, it's interesting that at this time, this guy is actually copying the Injil or the Gospels, right? It also calls him, it says that he had become a Christian. So by virtue of this, because this guy's a Christian, and this is the guy who Khadija decides to take Muhammad to, some people have concluded that it means that Khadija herself would have been a Christian at the time. Or at least, I don't know, maybe whatever. But either way, she just decided to go to a Christian dude instead. You know what I'm saying? This is like, similar to if something happens in your life today, like who are you going to go to? You're going to go to an imam? Are you going to go to a pastor? Are you going to go to, you know what I'm saying? And so, like there is an argument to be made that maybe Khadija herself was Christian, but either way, that's not really said here. It just said that she went to a Christian. Now, I want to make something else kind of clear here as well. In the Quran and a lot of these Islamic literature, they use the word Nasara for Christian. Nasara is not it doesn't mean Christian, right? The derivative for Christian is something to do with Masih, which is Messiah, or the word Messiah is the word for Christ. You know what I'm saying? So there's a variant of that like refers to Christians. And so when they use the word Nasara, they're referring to the Nazarenes. Nazarene is like a sect of Christianity. They're a heretic sect of Christianity, especially from about the 3rd century is where you get the Nazarenes from. And a lot of times, in Rome, where a lot of the bishops were dominantly in and like among, this is where, sort of the epicenter of Christianity is at about the 4th century, because prior to this, Christianity was persecuted. It's still persecuted even in the 4th and 5th century, and then on into the 6th, 7th, and then furthermore under the Ottoman Empire and all this type of stuff. And even now, I would argue that Christianity is heavily persecuted in the world. But prior to the 4th century, they weren't able to come together to have a council. They were able to do that under Constantine, where they held a council, and where at the first council they sort of expelled a heretic named Arian, right? Arius. And Arius went into parts of Palestine when he was kicked out, or what's known as Palestine. Well, I'm guessing the geographical location would change a little bit, but this is what was happening essentially to people who were exiled. They were sent out from the epicenter, from Rome. They weren't allowed to sort of coexist there. And so you'll find a lot of these heretic sects in those type of areas. And so it makes sense that when the Quran is referring to Christians, they call them Nasara instead of actual Christians. And so they're not actually dealing with it. It's an argument that can suggest that they're not actually dealing with actual Christians, but rather a heretic sect of Christianity, which actually makes sense when you think of some of the things that the Quran teaches and says about Christians and things like that, because it seems like it's dealing with an objection to something it doesn't really understand anyways, right? And so this guy's translating the Gospels into Arabic at the time, right? He was an old man and had lost his eyesight. So Warqa is old, doesn't see well. Khadija said to him, "Oh, my cousin, listen to the story of your nephew." Warqa asked, "Oh, my nephew, what have you seen?" The Prophet described whatever he had seen. Warqa said, "This is the Nemus," right? Now, you'll notice here he calls him his nephew. There is something to suggest that both Khadija and Muhammad had shared some family members. They're like third cousins or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So like, they're both related to Warqa is, the suggestion. I read it. It's mad confusing. Family lineage confuses me a little bit, but I understood that they're family essentially. So they're both related to Warqa. So Warqa is her cousin, but he's also related to Muhammad as well, right? And so notice Warqa said this is the same Nemus. Now the word that's used right here for Namus is it refers to the law of Moses. It doesn't. He never calls this, according to what I understand, he never calls this entity Angel Gabriel. Now, in the English translation, you'll find that that's what it says, right? And in a way, they're interpreting. They're sort of like translating, but interpreting at the same time. And so, and I mean, every translation does that to a degree. So, when you see the translations, sometimes, and this is why Muslims will actually tell you, if you read a translation of the Quran, you never read the Quran. You know what I'm saying? So they'll say, Daily Boy, I never read the Quran, because I'll just be reading in English, right? They'll just say you read the translation of the Quran. In fact, on my little nifty Quran that I got here as well, this is just my Word document, by the way, but on this little device that I got here, on my Quran, on the phone, it actually has the Quran, and then it has the English translation of the Quran. You can click that. So they make sure they separate it out. They wouldn't call that a Quran, right? And so, you want to be careful of things. So you'll notice, like, right here it says, i.e. Gabriel, the angel who keeps the secret. But you'll notice that this is in brackets, because it never says that in the Arabic. It never says that in the story. This is the interpretation again, right? But Namus means this is the law of Moses. Now, something interesting to think about, to stop and think about here, is I actually believe, and maybe I'm the only one that has like come to this conclusion, I actually believe that Waraka was referring to Jesus, because he is talking about the law of Moses, which is the word of Moses that came to Moses, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, he's referring to the word of God found in the Old Testament. If you didn't look at any of my videos on who's Jesus, somewhere in there, one of those addresses, the angel of the Lord. And so, that's a good video for you to watch to see what I'm talking about when it talks about the angel of the Lord, as Jesus Christ is referring to the message of God that came, or the messenger of God that came. And so this is what's later interpreted as the word of God manifested, because you're seeing this person treated as God, worshipped as God, like, people seeing him and saying, yo, like, we saw God and we didn't die, you know what I'm saying, and that type of thing, because they knew that they encountered Christ, God, and then later Jesus being revealed as the revelation of God, the way that God is making himself known and seen through the person of Christ, you know what I mean, in the Old Testament. By the way, that's before the incarnation, so we call it the pre-incarnate Christ, right? So I do kind of believe there is an argument to suggest that maybe that's what, my Dukes was referring to. It does seem like Waraka himself is sort of like necessarily doesn't really know what he's talking about either, and it's possible. But at least, here he says the Namus of God, right? The same Namus that came to Moses. And then it says, whom Allah had sent to Moses, right? So the Namus whom Allah had sent to Moses. So this law that was sent to Moses. And he's referring to the law as a person, right? So it says, I wish I were young and could live up to the time when your people will turn you out, right? So Waraka actually believes that, like, every prophet that comes ultimately gets persecuted and stuff like that. And so maybe that's what he's referring to here. In other hadiths, this plays this out. It says, Allah's messenger asked, will they turn me out? Waraka replied in the affirmative and said, never did a man come with something similar to what you have brought, but was treated with hostility. If I should remain alive till the day when you will be turned out. I then I would support you strongly. Now, y'all don't think nothing weird about the word turned out here, because y'all have like a cultural context of what that means. You get what the man is saying. He's saying they're gonna persecute you, essentially, right? But after a few days, work had died, and the divine inspiration was also paused for a while, and the prophet became so sad, as we have heard, that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains. And every time he went up to the mountain in order to throw himself down, Gabriel would appear before him and say, "O Muhammad, you are indeed Allah's messenger." Now, again, some of these are in brackets and they're referencing sometimes other sources and things like that. But this is, what this hadith says. So it's telling you that, he used to try to commit suicide, right? He used to attempt to go and commit suicide. And it says, whereupon his heart would be quiet and he would become quiet and he would become calm. Okay. And it says, Gabriel would appear before him and say, "O Muhammad, you are indeed Allah's messenger." In truth, whereupon his heart would become quiet and would become calm, and would calm down, and he would calm down and would return home. And whenever the period of the coming of the inspiration used to become long, he would do as before. But when he used to reach the top of the mountain, Gabriel would appear before him and say to him what he had said before, right? He's just affirming him that, yo, listen, bro, you're a messenger. So this guy keeps climbing up to mountains. This is after everything, right? So, just reiterating the story, bringing it back around. I know sometimes we have cognitive dissonance, personally, I'm a dude like that. So he has this cave hero encounter. He shook up and cooked up and booked up, and he's running to his shorty. He's saying, yo, cover me up, bro. Like, neck muscles popping, vein popping, everything, like, what I'm saying? Twitching, whatnot, right? She covers him. She says, yo, listen, fam, this is definitely not no demon coming to you because you're a good youth. So no demon wouldn't come to you. Let me take you to my cousin Warwica. Cousin Warwica now is saying, yo, listen, fam, after hearing that story, you a prophet, bro. You must be you the one. Like, this is the law of Moses that came to you, G. Like, I wish I would have been there to see your day. I'm not even sure at this point that my Dukes is even being authentic. It's very possible that he is. But, you can see someone in maybe the spirit of trying to comfort someone or whatever. Say, hey, man, like, don't worry, bro. Like, you're good. Like, yeah, maybe it's an angel, you know what I mean? And so it definitely, this is not, so far, this is not revealed by Allah or anything like that. This is a hadith. This is in the tradition. There's no competing narratives of how Islam started. This is it. You know what I'm saying? And so, they're saying they're comforting him. They're telling him, look, you're a prophet, right? So this is coming from, two people, one potentially Christian, most likely a heretic Christian, and one that we don't necessarily know her faith, potentially, again, maybe Christian, most likely just like a pagan, you know what I mean? And Khadijah, before the pre-Islamic time, was generally thought of as not being, definitely not Muslim, of course, right? Like, she would have been a part of like the other practices that were around the pre-Islamic times, right? The pagan practices or whatever, right? And so they're both, these two sort of very underqualified individuals are basically making the assessment that, look, bro, this must be an angel that came to you. Nowhere else, so far, it's not teaching that this is an angel. The, 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 entity himself never says, hey, I'm an angel. The circumstances in which this entity appears definitely seems nefarious, right? In the cave, in here, you know what I'm saying? Seclusion, not something that traditionally is practiced or thought of as being a Christian or a Judeo Christian practice or a Jewish practice before, of how we see prophets encountering God, angels or God. And even the encounters of like the pressing and the squeezing and the fear that he comes over him and whatnot doesn't seem in line with the biblical view. Definitely, whenever people encountered angels in the Bible, especially Gabriel, there are several encounters and people are scared. You know what I'm saying? They see this entity and they jump. They're like shook up at first. But however, they move on to being comforted. You know what I'm saying? He instantly attempts to be like, hey, peace, be still. You know, like, I come with good news of glad tidings and like, don't worry, like, you know, blah, 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 blah. And they never leave in fear and stuff like that. When they encounter these beings, there are times where they're like, yo, fam, I saw God. Like in the Old Testament, when they saw Jesus himself, they're like, yo, we saw God and we didn't die, bro. Are we gonna die, or like what's gonna happen, you know? But here, very different sort of like reaction and very different circumstances. Definitely doesn't seem like anything that goes in line with any of the previous scriptures and with how they had encountered had encounters with angels holistically. I mean, initially, yeah, like they were shocked, they were shook, they were in fear when something appeared to them. I probably feel, I could feel my heart right now. Imagine waking up and you see someone standing over you or something, even if it's an angel, dog. Like, you know what I'm saying? I prefer you guys to approach me in the daytime, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, calmly show me who you are or whatever. But don't, I don't know, man. I can imagine getting startled like that. Any case. So, he proceeds to go try to throw himself from a mountain after this entity keeps appearing to him, continuously reassuring him that he's a prophet and this is from God, essentially. And this calms him down. He gets off of these mountains and whatnot, right? You know, let me see. What else does it say? Anyways, let's just wrap that up there, right? Now again, that's Sahih Bukhari, 6982, book 91, hadith 1. You can you know, look that up and read it for your guys self. I might put the reference in there. There is some stories of Muhammad as a child. It's known as the chest opening. And in this story, you know, these two individuals come to Muhammad, they bust down his chest, they bust down his heart, they clean out his heart and his chest or whatever, and they put something in it. I have it here, but I don't want to read it because we're already almost at the hour mark anyways. And, you know, in these stories, you know, people around Muhammad that knew him were shook, took him back to his like parents' house, and they were just like, yo, dog, we're scared that this man is possessed by a demon, you know. And even his parents, I believe it's his father, is saying, yo, I'm afraid that this child had a stroke, so they took him back and whatnot. And, you know, people are saying, yo, I feared a demon has possessed him, you know what I'm saying? And so you could find some of this stuff in I think it's the Life of Muhammad. Let me see. Ibn Ashaq's biography of Muhammad's life. This one says it's on page 36, and this is the translation by W.M. Watts, right? But, you know, it's going to be difficult, again, like I said, to find some of the sources because you got to look around a little bit. So you want to look for, you know, the chest opening, just Google it and read some of these stories around it, you know, and, you know, look for critical takes and positive takes so that way you could read both. side by side, you know. Let's see. This is another one where, you know, this and in this passage it talks about Muhammad trying to throw himself. This is in the life of Muhammad in page. This is page 106, right? It says, so I read it, and he, right? So I, Muhammad, in brackets, read it, and he, Gabriel, in brackets, departed from me, and I awoke from my sleep, and it was though these words were being written on my heart. Taribi, Tabari, now none of, so this is what Tabari is saying, right? Now none of this of God's creatures was more helpful to me than an ecstatic poet or a man possessed. I could not even look at them. I thought, woe is me, poet or possessed. Never shall courage say this of me. I will go to the top of a mountain and throw myself down, that I may kill myself and gain rest. So when I went forth to do so, when I was midway on the mountain, I heard a voice from heaven say, O Muhammad, thou art the apostle of God, and I am Gabriel, right? So here in this hadith, it's not a hadith. I think it's just like, you know, a page, like a portion of like a page in the life of Muhammad, right? I guess it's a biography. There's a few biographies, by the way, and so in this biography, it reiterates this fact of him continually going and trying to throw himself from a mountain, and then being comforted by what is then described as, you know, the angel Gabriel. Again, you want to look into those claims to see if that's what's written in the Arabic or whatnot. But at least in the initial encounter, it's very unsure that it's very unsure that this entity ever reveals himself as the angel Gabriel. This is later interpreted as the angel Gabriel and then written in to the text, right? This is something Muhammad did quite a few times. You know what? I'm not going to read this here, but let me see. Oh, actually, let me read this one. I'm going to read this one, actually. Right? Ishmael B. Abu Hakim, a free man of the family of Al-Zubar, Bayar, Bayar, I don't know how to say that, told me on Khadija's authority that she had said to the apostle of God, O son of mine, my uncle, are you able to tell me about your visitant? When he comes to you? He replied that he could, and she asked him to tell her when he came. So when Gabriel came to him, and he was won't the sometimes the people translating make typo errors and whatnot, right? But you'll get the gist of the story anyways, right? I'm pretty sure that's a typo, but it says the apostle said to Khadija, this is Gabriel who has just come to me. Get up, O son of my uncle, she said, and sit on my left thigh. The apostle did so. Then she said, can you see him? Yes, he said. Yes, he said. She said, then turn around and sit on my right thigh. Right? He did so, and she said, can you see him? When he said that he could, she asked him to move and sit in her lap. When he had done this, she asked if he could see him, and he said yes. She disclosed her form Tashashrat, I don't know what it is, and cast aside her veil while the apostle was sitting in her lap. Then she said, "Can you see him?" And he replied, "No." She said, "O son of my uncle, rejoice and be of good heart. By God, he is an angel and not Satan." So this is from Ibn Ishaq, The Life of Muhammad. This is I guess this is the translator's name. It's Tr. Gulami. I don't know how to pronounce most of the stuff. Anyways, 1967. Sometimes I don't want to give you guys sources and all that. And the reason being is I can be a lot more entertaining and I can like tell you exactly what it says without having to read it and be all picky and weird, right? But in any case, bro, I read it anyways and I gave you the source. I'm sure you can find it, although that's just, it's going to be a little difficult, but I'm sure you can find it, right? So in this story, and there's several iterations of this same story as well. Some Muslims don't really like this story. They say it's weak and whatnot. Some Muslims don't rock with all of the hadiths, by the way, and so you have to have nuanced discussions with people when you're getting into it. But this is the prevailing narrative. So in this story, Khadijah's saying, "Look, bruh, when this angel comes again, let me know, because I'm a check, Now, at this point, he's not sure this is an angel. This is a test that she's about to do to see if it's an angel, right? Even though in the English translation here, it says angel sometimes, right? But if you look at the holistic story, it doesn't seem like they know that this is an angel. They definitely seem like they're questioning it, and he's skeptical, and she's skeptical. And so what she does is she says, he comes to her and he says, "Yeah, bro, he's here. All right, bad." She's like, "All right, sit on my, left leg." I don't know which one first. Let's say left. And she puts him on the left leg. And she's like, "Yo, is he still here?" And he's like, "Yeah, still here." She's like, "Okay, turn around and sit on my right leg." You know what I'm saying? So, he's turned around. He's sitting on her right leg. Or left, whichever one came after. And she's like, "Is he still here?" And he's like, "Yeah, still here." So then she takes him, puts him in between her lap, and she's like, "Okay, is he still here?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then she proceeds to disrobe. You know what I mean? That's what this weird word I was struggling with, tahassarat. You know what I'm saying? And then it says her veil she threw aside. In some other iterations, the way this is seen is like she takes off her garments, or she takes off portions of her garments at least. And then she asks, "Yo, is he still here?" Now, if you get what's going on, it's kind of like she's testing to see how long this entity would stay while it's looking like they're about to do something. You know what I'm saying? And so the fact that she disrobes and he says, "Nah, it's not here anymore," is where she's like, "Yo, by Allah, dog, say wallah, yo, you're the man, you're the GOAT, because look, this means this is an angel. This is her test. This is how they figured out that this is an angel," you know what I'm saying? From God, essentially, because she did this. And honestly, I've read some things where Muslims have these major beef over like, "Yo, can Allah see you when you're in the toilet?" And, "Can he not?" And then they get very like, they can get passionate about it. And sometimes they get to arguing to the point where they call each other kafirs and stuff like that, where they're like saying, "Yo, you're an apostate," essentially, because, because of this discussion over like, can an angel be around certain things. There's one definite hadith, and this is why a lot of times you'll notice that like a lot of Muslims don't have dogs, because it's taught that like a dog, like angels can't enter into a house where there's a dog, which is another reason, by the way. Let me just say this as a guy, and here's our man. We grew up knowing about animals, being able to see demons and things like that. And like, I mean, I've had animals where they've been, I'm convinced that they see demons, you know what I'm saying? That's how I'm going to say, my dog would lock on to something that's like in the room and looking at it and just like, and she's like, just like she looks like she's seeing something, and she's just looking at him, at whatever that thing is. And we were all sitting there, we're like, I try to kick her, move her around, you know what I'm saying, to pick her up, lift her, and she goes back around and looks back straight at, I'll put her in the other room just to check, and she run back and just kind of look, and sometimes they start to growl and like, you know what I mean? It seems like they're scared of something or they're seeing something, And definitely, I'm one of those people that believe that, sometimes they can see entities and see things that we're not seeing, you know what I'm saying? And, it does seem like, and that story is funny too. We should get into that story of how they got to this conclusion of, the fact that, apparently Gabriel couldn't come into a house where there was a dog. The dog wasn't even in the house. It was under the house somewhere, a little puppy, apparently, and yeah, it's a funny story, but this video is already 1 hour 11 minutes long. But anyways, we'll wrap it up there. There's some Quran verses where people sort of insinuate that Muhammad is a madman or possessed, they're calling him, which not too abnormal, but it's other corroborating evidence for this theory that this might not be an actual malevolent being, but rather a benevolent being, but rather a malevolent encounter in nature, right? People accusing him of being possessed. There's even some Quran verses where Allah is vindicating him by saying, listen, bro, this guy's not mad, he's not possessed, you know what I mean? There's like, I'm not gonna read them all again because we're already well out of time. And there's there is the story satanic verses. Now this is the story. There's some verses in the Quran that talks about these exalted cranes that take prayers, you know what I mean, up to Allah, essentially, Allah and Al-Uzza and Al-Manat. And this is apparently a verse that was given to Muhammad by Satan. Now a lot of people don't believe that this hadith is true, but it is a thing to look at least it's interesting. So there's also the satanic verses that was apparently like, this is where they said the prophet was reciting and then Satan threw something into whatever he was saying, and then so it just seems like at least those verses were given by Satan for him to recite. And then there is the Muhammad being affected by black magic story. If you guys want to see that, I'll just give you the reference. It's Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 7, book 71, hadith number 660. You could read that. This is, him being affected by black magic and things like that. And there's some other things that we could talk about, essentially. But, just on the wrap up, so overall, we were just looking at the origin story of Muhammad here. And we're looking at, the hadith that shows you the first encounter that he had. And just from a critical standpoint, bro, it's just like, like you could read that and you could say, okay, well, and I have seen Muslims read that and like they're just like they kind of bypass these nuances. They don't really get it. And then I would like point them out, and then they would either have to come up with something to refute it or reject it, or they would just acknowledge it a lot of times and say, yeah, okay, yeah, like you was scared, of course, like people are scared when they see, okay, yeah, he was twisting or whatever, yeah, he was trying to commit suicide, but he was a prophet. Look, it affirms after that he was a prophet. You can't take that part and take apart another part. So Muslims, by and large, know this story by and large, have heard this story in some form. Maybe they haven't thought about it critically, but from a critical perspective, we're seeing the first encounter having all these various issues, the place that it's in a dark cave somewhere, and this entity showing up, not really ever saying who he is or what he is or why he's there, asking him to read, although he knows he can't read, and he's saying he can't read over and over, then pressing him or choking him in some passages, or squeezing him in some other passages, or throwing him to the ground and like pressing him on the ground, something like that. In some other iterations of the story, him running to his wife Khadija, neck vein popping in some stories, muscles twitching, this, that, heart beating, cover me, and like hiding him, and then him not knowing who this entity is, her then doing taking him to her cousin, who's this shaky sort of Christian dude, and like he's saying, yo fam, like, yo, you must be a prophet, and then these weird tests that they do to figure out, to basically say that he's like this is an angel that came to him, where she's putting him to like sit on her leg, and in between her leg, and disrobing, and like concluding. We have people, I have people like that, especially being a Guyanese, coming from back home. I'm saying people use their own sort of rationality and things like that to figure out things for themselves. And not to say that it's dumb, but sometimes there's some kind of logic to it, but at the same time it's not conclusive, and it's not a good way of trying to figure out things. There's a little bit of more robust ways of like figuring out something like that. And the last thing I'm gonna say before I close off this video is, we as Christians should already believe and already know that this is a demonic entity that Muhammad had an encounter with, if the story is even true in the first place, because of the revelation and the contradiction of that revelation to the gospel of Jesus Christ. The scripture tells us that even if an angel from heaven was to come and to preach a different message than what Paul and the disciples preached, let that angel be accursed. You know what I'm saying? So, and it warns you about false prophets to come and those type of things. So without even looking at all of this, we could look at the message of the Quran, and we could look at the message of the Bible, and we could say this is anti-Christ. You know what I'm saying? We could say that this does not line up with the original revelations. This is attempting to take away the salvation that's found in Christ by his death, burial, and resurrection. And, all of the foreshadowings of that coming up to the salvation that we have in Christ. And it's also attempting to swerve the fact that Jesus is God, calling this shirk, calling it associating partners with Allah, saying it's an unforgivable sin, saying that Christians and Jews are the worst of all creatures, and various other things that are definitely anti-Christ when we look at our text versus the text, our revelation versus the revelations that are given to Muhammad. We can deduce that point without this, but there you go. There's a robust, way of looking at this as well. I know I'm long-winded sometimes. I know I'm bad at reading, but, I hope that you guys get through some of these videos and you guys learn a lot. Big ups to everybody who does get through the videos and do rock with the content and do reach out to me and say, man, I learned so much, or I really enjoyed this video, or that and that and that. And you know what I'm saying? Anyways, piecemeal it if you have to. Watch it in 20-minute segments if you have to. Take your time. These videos will be out there for the rest of like whenever, until, we start getting banned from YouTube or something. But God bless you guys. You don't know.